Huge waves, wild winds, and even blizzard conditions are the calling card of some of the most notorious nor'easters in our country's history.
But now new research suggests that nor'easters are getting stronger every year, upping the ante significantly in terms of impacts for the most populous corridor in America.
Well, we're joined right now by one of the co-authors of the study, who is also the director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. Michael Mann, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Can you talk to us a bit more about this study? What did you find? What benchmarks did you look at?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be with you. So what we did is we used what are known as reanalysis data because we don't have all of the meteorological measurements we would like to going back, say, 50 years. But we have enough measurements that we can use a numerical weather forecasting model to fill in the gaps. And the result of that is sort of a melding of observations and the model, and it's called reanalysis data, and it's very useful for this sort of project. So what we did is we looked back 50 years, more than 50 years, at the reanalysis data that are available back to 1950, and we were interested in seeing if there was a trend in the characteristics of these so-called nor'easters, these mid-latitude storms that in some respects are sort of like tropical storms because they derive some of their energy from the heat that's released by the evaporation of seawater, relatively warm oceans. Even in the winter, the oceans are quite warm relative to the land. And so, like hurricanes, we suspected that as the oceans warm up, we might be expecting to see increased intensities in these storms, and that's what we found.
Very interesting. We've had a lot of recent discussion on nor'easters and the number of them, because last year was basically a year without nor'easters there in the Northeast. So did you look at the number of storms or just the intensity of storms? Yeah,
we were interested specifically in the intensity of the storms. There are so many factors that can influence how many of these storms you have in a given season. And it gets a little tricky when you look at some of the weaker storms to decide are they really nor'easters or not. So we used a criterion where the central pressure had to be 960 millibars or lower. That corresponds to a threshold where you only generally see a few of these sorts of storms a year, a few storms each season that reach that level of intensity. And that's when they start they start to take on some of the characteristics of even tropical storms. Some of these storms actually have eye-like structures. So we were interested in the strongest of these storms and whether they are getting stronger, because that's actually a finding with hurricanes. Will there be more tropical cyclones or fewer tropical cyclones? There's a debate about that still. But what we are seeing is that the strongest hurricanes are getting stronger. We just saw what might have been the strongest hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin. And so we were interested to see if there was evidence that nor'easters are showing that same pattern. And they are. The strongest nor'easters are getting stronger. It's roughly a 6% increase in the wind speed, but the destructive potential of a storm, the storm surge, often scales as the square or the third power of that wind speed. So we're talking, a 20% increase, for example, in the destructiveness of those winds.
Let's talk about the importance of all this. How can local officials and emergency managers use this information from your study to help citizens be better prepared?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I mean, we pay so much attention to the threat of hurricanes when it comes to storm surge and coastal damage, coastal threat, flooding, that sometimes we don't pay enough attention to these storms, which can be every bit as impactful along the mid-Atlantic coast and up into the northeastern United States. So we should be thinking not just about how hurricanes are potentially becoming more powerful and the measures that we have to take to insulate ourselves from those impacts, but we have to be thinking about these winter storms as well, these more powerful nor'easters that can be paralyzing, that produce huge amounts of snowfall, strong winds, damaging winds, and of course, very threatening storm surges. We need to be thinking about both how we adapt to the worsening of these impacts, and we have to take into account that this is another measure of the damage that climate change is doing, and it really is an argument for mitigating, for moving away from fossil fuels, reducing the continued warming of the planet.
Yeah, indeed. I know one thing that you looked at in your study was higher precip rates. We talk about that all the time, whether it's rain or snow. And so we just saw it when it comes to hurricanes. We had very powerful Category 5 Hurricane Melissa. And so these stronger low pressures, no matter what form they take, have big impacts. So thank you so much for joining us and talking more about that. Michael Mann, author of this new study, also wrote the book Science Under Siege, and more. Actually, has a couple of books. So thanks as always for joining us.
Thanks so much. Always a pleasure, folks.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really one of those things that needs to be studied and needs to be thought about, right? These storms are very impactful, right? No doubt about it.